The scream that tore through the adobe walls of the Martinez house that scorching August afternoon in 1878 made every soul within earshot freeze in their tracks. And it was not a scream of pain, but of rage so pure it seemed to crack the very air itself. Elena Martinez stood in her own kitchen, her cheek still burning from where her stepfather's hand had struck her, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth, and the only crime she had committed was answering her dying mother's whispered question in the language they had always spoken together, the language of her childhood, the language of her heart. Spanish? "English!" Robert Thornton roared, his face purple with fury, spittle flying from his lips. "In my house, you speak English, you filthy—" Elena did not wait to hear the rest. She ran. Her mother's weak voice called after her, "Mija, por favor." But Elena could not stop, could not turn back, could not bear another moment in that house where even her tongue was a prisoner. She burst through the back door into the blinding New Mexico sun, her bare feet slapping against the hard-packed earth, as she ran toward the only place she had ever felt truly safe, the old mission ruins at the edge of her family's land that had belonged to the Martinez family for 3 generations, before her mother had made the terrible mistake of marrying an Anglo banker after Elena's father died of fever 5 years ago. The ruins were cool and shadowed, smelling of old stone and desert sage. Elena collapsed against a crumbling wall, her whole body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief, somewhere that touched the core of who she was. She was 19 years old, and she felt like she was disappearing, being erased one word at a time. Her stepfather had been growing worse over the past year, his rules becoming more rigid, his punishments more severe. He had forbidden Spanish in the house 6 months ago, claiming it was uncivilized, that it marked them as inferior. Her mother, weakened by the consumption that was slowly killing her, had not had the strength to fight him. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool stone and whispered every Spanish word she could remember, a litany, a prayer, a rebellion. Madre, padre, hermano, cielo, tierra, amor, vida, corazón. The words felt like water in a drought, like breathing after being held underwater. "Those are pretty words," a voice said from the doorway, startling her so badly she nearly screamed again. "Though I do not know what they mean." Elena whirled around, her heart hammering. A man stood silhouetted against the bright doorway, tall and lean, wearing the dust-covered clothes of someone who had been riding hard. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out more details: a weather-beaten hat, sandy hair that needed cutting, a face that might have been handsome if it were not so sunburned and tired. He held his hands up, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I did not mean to frighten you. I heard crying and thought someone might be hurt." "I am fine," Elena said stiffly, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. She could feel her cheek swelling where Thornton had hit her. "You should go." The man did not move. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual gray blue, like storm clouds. He was looking at her face, at the mark that was surely already darkening into a bruise. His jaw tightened. "Whoever did that to you should be horsewhipped." "It is none of your concern." "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I have never been good at minding my own business." He took a step inside, moving slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "My name is James Wheeler. I just hired on at the Crawford Ranch about 5 miles west of here. I was riding the property line when I heard you." Elena said nothing. She did not know the Crawford Ranch well. It was one of the newer spreads, owned by a retired cavalry officer. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but something in his voice, in the genuine concern in his eyes, made her hesitate rather than run again. "Elena," she said finally. "Elena Martinez." "Miss Martinez," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed old-fashioned and courtly. "Those words you were saying, that was Spanish, was it not?" She tensed, waiting for the disgust, the disapproval. But James Wheeler just looked curious. "Yes," she said defiantly. "It was Spanish. It is my language, my father's language, my grandparents' language. This land was Mexico before it was America, and some of us have not forgotten that." To her surprise, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, maybe only 23 or 24. "I reckon that is something worth remembering," he said, "and worth keeping alive. Will you teach me?" Elena stared at him. "What?" "Will you teach me Spanish?" he repeated. "I have always wanted to learn another language, but I have never had anyone to teach me. And it seems to me that if someone is willing to take a beating rather than stop speaking their own tongue, that is a language worth knowing." Something cracked open in Elena's chest, something that had been locked tight and hurting. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want to learn?" James Wheeler took off his hat and ran a hand through his dusty hair. "Because I have been drifting for 5 years now. Since I was 18, working ranches from Texas to Colorado, and I have seen a lot of ugliness in that time. A lot of people treating other people like they are less than human just because they look different or talk different or pray different. And I am tired of it. I am tired of being part of a world that works that way. So maybe learning your language would not fix anything, but it would be a start. My start." Elena felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had been crying before. "I do not even know you." "No," he agreed. "But maybe we could fix that too." That was how it started, in the cool shadows of the old mission ruins, with a bruise on her face and a stranger who wanted to learn her words. They agreed to meet the next day, same place, same time, when Elena could slip away from the house while her stepfather was at the bank. She did not tell her mother where she was going. She could not bear to see the hope in her mother's eyes, not when she had no idea if this strange cowboy would even show up. But he did. James Wheeler was waiting for her when she arrived at the ruins the next afternoon, sitting on a fallen block of stone with a small leather-bound notebook and a pencil stub. He stood when he saw her, and his smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I was afraid you would not come," he admitted. "I was afraid you would not," Elena replied. They sat together in the ruins, and Elena began to teach. She started with simple words. "Hello, goodbye, please, thank you. Hola, adios, por favor, gracias." James wrote each one down carefully in his notebook, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a ranch hand. He repeated the words after her, his pronunciation terrible at first. But he kept trying, kept asking her to correct him, until he could say, "Gracias," without it sounding like he was choking on gravel. "You are a terrible student," Elena said, but she was smiling. "I know," James said cheerfully, "but I am a persistent one. Give me another word." She taught him caballo for horse, agua for water, cielo for sky. She taught him numbers and colors and the names of animals, and as she taught him words, he told her about himself. He had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 4 boys. His mother had died when he was 15, and his father had remarried a year later to a woman who made it clear there was not enough room or food for all the stepchildren she had inherited. So James had left, heading west like so many other young men with nothing to lose and everything to prove. "I have been working ranches ever since," he said, "never staying anywhere too long, always figuring the next place might be better, might feel more like home. But it never did. Everywhere was just another place to work and sleep and move on from." "And now?" Elena asked. "What about the Crawford Ranch?" James looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I am starting to think I might have a reason to stay," he said quietly. They met every day for a week, then 2 weeks, then a month. The lessons expanded beyond simple vocabulary. Elena taught James phrases, sentences, the rhythm and music of Spanish. She taught him how to roll his R's, how to soften his vowels, how to let the words flow together like water. And James, despite his initial struggles, proved to be a quick learner once he got past the basics. He practiced constantly, repeating phrases to himself as he worked, writing new words in his notebook every night by candlelight. But the lessons were not just about language. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elena told him about her father, who had been a kind man with gentle hands and a voice like honey when he sang. She told him about growing up speaking 2 languages, how she had learned English in school but Spanish at home, how both had felt equally natural until Robert Thornton had made one of them a crime. "My mother is dying," she told James one afternoon, her voice breaking. "The doctor says she has maybe 6 months left, maybe less, and I cannot even talk to her, cannot say the things I need to say, because he is always there, always listening, always ready to punish us for being who we are." James reached out and took her hand, the first time he had touched her beyond helping her over rough ground. His palm was calloused and warm, and Elena felt something electric pass between them. Then we will make sure every word you say to her counts, he said fiercely. English or Spanish, it does not matter. The love will come through. But Elena knew it did matter. There were things she could only say in Spanish, feelings that had no translation, memories that lived in her mother's language. And every day that passed with those words locked inside her felt like losing another piece of her mother before she was even gone. It was James who came up with the idea. They were sitting in the ruins on a particularly hot afternoon in late September, taking shelter from the sun, when he said, "What if I talked to him?" Elena looked at him like he had lost his mind. "What?" "Your stepfather. What if I talked to him, asked him to ease up on the rules? I could tell him I am learning Spanish, that it is a useful language for business and trade, that there is nothing wrong with—" "No," Elena said sharply. "James, no, you do not know him. He would not listen, and he might—" She stopped, fear clenching her throat. "He might what?" James asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "He might forbid me from seeing you," Elena whispered. "If he knew we were meeting, if he knew you were learning Spanish from me, he would make sure I never left the house again. He already watches me like a hawk. If my mother were not so sick, needing care, he would have locked me in my room months ago." James's face darkened with anger, but he nodded. "All right, we will keep this between us. But, Elena, you cannot live like this forever. Something has to change." "I know," she said. "But right now, these afternoons with you are the only thing keeping me sane. Please do not do anything that would take that away." So they continued their secret meetings, and as autumn painted the desert in shades of gold and red, Elena found herself falling in love. It crept up on her slowly at first, then all at once. The way James listened when she talked, really listened, like her words were precious. The way he laughed at his own mistakes and celebrated his small victories, like the day he successfully told her an entire story in halting, imperfect Spanish. The way he looked at her, like she was the most remarkable person he had ever met. And James was falling too. He loved the way Elena's face lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about, the way her hands moved when she spoke Spanish, graceful and expressive. He loved her strength, the steel in her spine that's kept her going even when everything seemed designed to break her. He loved her kindness, the way she still cared for her mother with tenderness, even when it would have been easier to harden her heart. They fell in love in two languages, with words and with silences. And it was the most natural thing in the world. One October afternoon, when the cottonwood trees were dropping golden leaves like coins, James said something in Spanish that Elena did not recognize as part of their lessons. "Te amo," he said, and his pronunciation was perfect. Elena's heart stopped. "Where did you learn that?" "From one of the vaqueros at the ranch. I asked him how to say I love you. I wanted to make sure I got it right." James took both her hands in his. "Elena, I love you. I have loved you since the day I heard you speaking your truth in these ruins, since the moment you decided to trust me. And I know this is complicated, and I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy, with $73 saved and a horse that is getting old. But I want to offer you what I have. I want to give you a life where you can speak any language you want, where no one will ever raise a hand to you again, where you can be entirely yourself." Elena was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Te amo," she said back. "I love you, James Wheeler. I love you so much it frightens me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and careful, like she was something precious that might break. It was Elena's first kiss, and it tasted like hope. "Marry me," James whispered against her lips. "When you are ready, when the time is right. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life learning every word you have to teach me." "Yes," Elena said, and it was the easiest answer she had ever given. But saying yes and making it happen were two different things. There was still Robert Thornton to contend with, and Elena's mother, who was fading faster than the autumn light. Elena could not leave her, could not abandon her to face death alone, with only Thornton's cold disapproval for company. So she and James made plans in secret, meeting in the ruins whenever they could steal time, building a future out of whispered words and careful dreams. James had been saving his wages, putting aside every penny he could spare. The foreman at the Crawford Ranch liked him, thought he had potential, and there was talk of making him assistant foreman come spring, which would mean better pay and a small house on the ranch property. It was not much, but it would be theirs. "We could have a garden," Elena said dreamily. I could grow the herbs my grandmother used to grow, cilantro and epazote and yerba buena. I could teach you to cook the foods my mother taught me. And we could speak Spanish whenever we wanted, James added. I could keep learning, keep getting better. Maybe we could even teach our children someday. The mention of children made Elena blush, but it also filled her with longing so intense it hurt. She had never let herself imagine a future like that. A future where she could be happy, where she could build something beautiful. Now, with James, it seemed not just possible, but inevitable. But first, they had to wait. November came, cold and sharp, and Elena's mother grew weaker. She could no longer leave her bed, could barely take more than a few spoonfuls of broth. Elena spent her days caring for her, sponging her fevered forehead, reading to her in soft English while Thornton was in the house, switching to Spanish in stolen moments when he stepped out. "Mija," her mother whispered one afternoon when they were alone. "You seem different, happier." Elena hesitated, then decided her mother deserved the truth. "I have met someone," she said quietly in Spanish. "A good man. He is teaching himself Spanish for me, Mama. He wants to marry me." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Does he love you?" "Yes, and I love him." "Then you must go with him," her mother said, gripping Elena's hand with surprising strength. "When I am gone, you must leave this house and never look back. Promise me, Elena. Promise me you will choose love over duty, happiness over obligation." "Mama, I cannot leave you." "You can, and you will," her mother insisted. "I have made so many mistakes, Mija. Marrying Robert was the biggest one. I thought he could provide security, stability, that it would be enough. But a life without love, without joy, without the freedom to be yourself, that is not a life at all. That is just existing. Promise me you will have more." "I promise," Elena whispered, and she held her mother as she fell back into an exhausted sleep. 2 weeks later, on a gray morning in late November, Elena's mother died. She went peacefully, with Elena holding one hand and whispering prayers in Spanish that Thornton could not hear from where he stood, rigid in the doorway. The last word Elena's mother spoke was libre, which meant free, and Elena chose to believe she was. The funeral was small and cold, conducted in English by a Protestant minister who had never met the woman he was eulogizing. Thornton forbade any Spanish, any acknowledgement of Maria Martinez's heritage or history. It was like he was burying not just a woman, but an entire culture, an entire language, an entire way of being. Elena stood at the graveside, silent and hollow, feeling like she had been carved out from the inside. James came to the funeral. He stood at the back, his hat in his hands, his eyes never leaving Elena. When it was over, when the other mourners had drifted away, he approached and took her hand just for a moment. "I am so sorry," he said, and there was such genuine grief in his voice that Elena nearly broke down, but she could not there, not where Thornton might see. "Thank you for coming," she managed. "Elena," James said urgently, quietly, "you do not have to go back to that house. You could come with me right now. We could go to the justice of the peace in town. We could be married by nightfall, and he could never touch you again." Oh, how Elena wanted to say yes, but she shook her head. "My mother's will. I need to hear the will. She told me once that my father left me the land, held in trust until I was 21 or married. I need to know what happens to it now. If I run, Thornton might find a way to claim it all, and I cannot let him have the last piece of my family." James looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "When?" he asked. "The lawyer is coming tomorrow afternoon. After that I will send word. Be ready." "I am already ready," James said. "I have been ready since the day I met you." That night, Elena lay in her narrow bed in the house that had never been a home and made her plans. Her few precious possessions were already packed in an old carpet bag hidden under her bed. Her mother's silver cross, a photograph of her father, her grandmother's recipe book, written in Spanish that Thornton did not know existed. She had the clothes on her back and a little money she had saved from selling eggs in town. It was not much, but it would be enough. The lawyer came the next day, a portly man with spectacles and a briefcase full of papers. He sat in the parlor with Elena and Thornton, cleared his throat, and began to read. Most of the will was as expected, personal effects to Elena, a small sum of money to the church. But then came the part about the land. "And I leave to my daughter, Elena Maria Martinez, the full ownership of the property known as the Martinez Homestead. consisting of 320 acres, to be hers free and clear upon my death, with no restrictions or encumbrances. I further specified that my husband, Robert Thornton, has no claim to this property, as it was owned by my family prior to our marriage and was never joint property. Thornton exploded out of his chair. That is impossible. I have been managing that land for 5 years. I have put money into it, work into it. The will is quite clear, Mr. Thornton, the lawyer said mildly. The land belongs to Miss Martinez. However, the house was built during your marriage, so you are entitled to half its value should it be sold, but the land itself is hers alone. Elena sat very still, her heart pounding. 320 acres, her father's land, her grandfather's land, now hers. It changed everything. Thornton turned to her, his face mottled with rage. You scheming little... I would advise you to be very careful what you say next, Mr. Thornton. The lawyer interrupted. Miss Martinez is now a property owner, which makes her a person of some standing in this community. And there are laws against threatening or assaulting property owners, just as there should have been laws against what I suspect has been happening in this house. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Elena stood, smoothing her black mourning dress, and looked him in the eye. You will leave this house by the end of the week, she said, and her voice did not shake. Take your personal belongings and go. I will have the half value of the house assessed and sent to whatever address you provide, but the land and the house belong to me now, and you are not welcome here. For a moment she thought he might strike her, his hand actually raised, clenched into a fist. But the lawyer stood as well, positioning himself between them, and Thornton seemed to realize he was beaten. You will regret this, he hissed at Elena. You will fail. This land will fail, and you will come crawling back, begging me to take it off your hands. I will not, Elena said simply. Goodbye, Mr. Thornton. After the lawyer left, after the papers were signed and filed, Elena waited until she heard Thornton slam into his study and pour himself a drink. Then she retrieved her bag from under the bed, slipped out the back door, and ran. She ran across the dead winter fields, her breath clouding in the cold air, her bag bouncing against her hip. She ran to the old mission ruins, where she knew James would be waiting, where he had promised to wait every day at sunset until she came. He was there. Of course he was there. He saw her coming and jumped to his feet, his face alight with hope and fear. Elena, what happened? Are you all right? She threw herself into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. The land is mine. My mother left me the land, all of it, and I threw Thornton out. James, I am free. I am finally free. He spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. Then marry me, he said. Right now, tonight. We can ride into town and find a justice of the peace or a minister who will do it. Marry me, Elena, and let us start our life together. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They rode double on James's horse through the gathering dusk, racing the sunset into town. The justice of the peace was just closing up his office when they burst in, breathless and windblown, begging him to perform a marriage. He looked at them, a dust-covered cowboy and a young woman in a mourning dress with wild hope in her eyes, and smiled. I suppose love cannot wait, he said. Do you have a witness? His wife served as witness, a plump, kind woman who cried happy tears through the entire brief ceremony. James did not have a ring, but he took off the leather cord he wore around his neck, the one that held a small silver medallion his mother had given him, and tied it around Elena's finger as a promise. I, James Wheeler, take you, Elena Martinez, to be my wife, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to love you, to protect you, to learn from you, and to build a life with you where we both can be exactly who we are meant to be. Elena's voice shook when she repeated her own vows, but not from fear, from joy so overwhelming she could barely contain it. And when the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her like she was air, and he had been drowning. Te amo, mi esposa, he whispered against her lips. I love you, my wife. And his accent was perfect. They spent their wedding night at the small boarding house in town, in a clean, simple room that seemed like a palace to Elena after the prison her stepfather's house had become. James was gentle and patient, waiting until Elena was ready, until her shyness gave way to curiosity and then to passion. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, and when Elena finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt like she had come home to a place she had been searching for her entire life. The next morning, they went to the bank. Elena marched in with her marriage certificate and the deed to her land, and she opened an account in her married name, Mrs. Elena Wheeler. The bank manager, who had always been deferential to Robert Thornton, was clearly shocked to see Thornton's stepdaughter claiming her independence. But the paperwork was legal, and there was nothing he could do. Then they went to the Crawford Ranch, where James explained to his foreman that he was now a married man with property of his own. The foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Bill Carter, grinned and clapped him on the back. "About time you settled down, Wheeler," he said. "I knew you had it in you. But listen, if you ever need work, or if you need help with that land of yours, you come find me. You have been a good hand, and I do not forget that." "Thank you, Bill," James said, shaking his hand. "I have a feeling we will be taking you up on that." Moving into the house was strange and difficult. It still smelled like Thornton's cigars, still held echoes of his anger and her mother's sadness. But Elena was determined to make it theirs. She threw open every window despite the December cold, airing out the rooms. She and James scrubbed and swept and rearranged furniture. She packed up everything that had belonged to Thornton, storing it in the barn for him to collect, and took down the heavy dark curtains he had preferred, letting light flood in. "Tell me about this house," James said one evening as they worked. "Tell me about what it was like before him." So Elena told him. She spoke in Spanish, letting the words flow free, and James listened and understood most of it now, after months of lessons. She told him about her father building this house when she was 5, how he had carved her name into a beam in her bedroom, so she would always know she belonged there. She told him about her mother teaching her to make tortillas in the kitchen, about her grandmother's visits when the house would fill with the sound of Spanish songs and laughter. "That is the house I want to bring back," she said. "That is the home I want us to have." "Then that is what we will make," James promised. They worked the land together that winter, making plans for spring planting. It turned out that James knew more about ranching than farming, but he was willing to learn, and Elena had grown up helping her father with the crops. They decided to plant some of the land with hay and alfalfa, which they could sell to other ranchers, and keep part of it for a vegetable garden and a small orchard. James suggested they might also run some cattle, just a small herd to start. "We will need help," Elena said practically. "We cannot work all this land ourselves." "I know," James agreed. "In the spring, we will hire some hands. Maybe some of the vaqueros from the Crawford Ranch would be willing to work for us part-time." December turned to January, and Elena and James settled into married life. It was not always easy. They were both young and stubborn, and they had to learn how to compromise, how to communicate, how to be partners. But they were also deeply in love, and that made everything else possible. James continued to improve his Spanish, practicing daily until he was nearly fluent. Elena taught him the words to songs her grandmother had sung, and sometimes in the evenings they would sit by the fire, and he would ask her to tell him stories in Spanish, or read to him from her grandmother's recipe book. "I love listening to you speak Spanish," he told her one night. "It is like music. I could listen to you forever and never get tired of it." Elena smiled and switched to Spanish. "You understand what I am saying now, do not you? Almost everything?" "Almost everything," James confirmed in Spanish, his accent still not quite right, but close enough. "You are saying that you think I am very handsome and you are lucky to have married me." Elena laughed. "I said no such thing." "No?" James grinned and pulled her into his lap. "Then what did you say?" "I said that I love you more than words can express in any language," Elena said softly. "Spanish or English, there are not enough words for how much I love you." "Then we will have to invent new ones," James said, and kissed her. In February, they received a letter that Thornton had left New Mexico entirely, taking a position at a bank in California. Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even realized she was carrying. He was truly gone. He could never come back and try to claim what was hers, never hurt her again. "Good riddance," James said when she told him, and Elena agreed. Spring came, bringing warmth and rain and new life to the land. They plowed and planted, working from dawn to dusk, their hands blistering and their backs aching. But there was joy in the work too, satisfaction in seeing the seeds they had planted begin to sprout. in watching the land that had seemed dead all winter come back to life. True to his word, James hired several men to help with the work, including 2 vaqueros from the Crawford Ranch named Miguel and Carlos. They were both experienced ranch hands, quick to laugh and hard workers. When Elena greeted them in Spanish, their faces lit up with surprise and delight. "Señora, it is good to hear our language spoken by the woman of the house," Miguel said. "We have worked many places where we were forbidden to speak anything but English, even among ourselves." "You will never be forbidden to speak Spanish here," Elena said firmly. "This land belonged to my family when it was still part of Mexico, and Spanish is as much the language of this place as English, maybe more." Miguel and Carlos proved to be invaluable. They knew ranching inside and out, and they taught James techniques for managing cattle and horses that he had never learned in his years of drifting from ranch to ranch. They also helped Elena expand her garden, showing her how to use irrigation channels to make the most of the scarce water. The little community they were building began to grow. Other Mexican families in the area, hearing that the Martinez land was once again owned by someone who honored her heritage, would stop by to trade goods or share news. Elena's kitchen became a gathering place where Spanish was spoken freely, where old recipes were shared and old songs were sung. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. In May, Elena began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure, counting days, noting the changes in her body. When she was certain, she decided to tell James in a special way. She made her grandmother's recipe for mole, a complex sauce that took all day to prepare, and served it to him at dinner. "This is incredible," James said, savoring each bite. "What is the occasion?" "I wanted to make you something special," Elena said, her heart racing. "Something that takes time and patience and care, like raising a child." James froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Elena, are you saying—" "I am saying that in about 7 months, there will be 3 of us instead of 2. James let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every bird in a mile radius. He jumped up and pulled Elena into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully, like she might break. "We are going to have a baby? Truly?" "Truly," Elena confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "I am going to be a father," James said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Oh, Elena, I am going to do everything I can to be a good father, to give our child the kind of love and acceptance I know you will give them. And we will raise them speaking both languages, hearing both heritages. They will know they are part of 2 worlds and that both are equally valuable." "Yes," Elena agreed, her hands moving to her still flat belly. "Yes, that is exactly what we will do." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Elena tired easily. But James was attentive and caring, taking over more of the physical labor, making sure Elena rested, bringing her cool water, and fanning her when the heat grew unbearable. Miguel's wife, Rosa, heard about the pregnancy and began stopping by regularly, bringing remedies and advice, and the kind of motherly wisdom Elena desperately missed. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Rosa said one afternoon, as she and Elena sat shelling peas on the porch. "You have taken her legacy and turned it into something beautiful. This land lives again because of you." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She cried so easily now, over everything. "I wish she could have met James. I wish she could have seen that I found love, real love, like she wanted from me." "She knows," Rosa said firmly. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she is smiling." As fall approached, Elena grew larger and more uncomfortable. James fretted over her constantly, which she found both endearing and exasperating. He spoke to their baby in Spanish every night, practicing his pronunciation, telling stories about his day. Elena would lie there, one hand on her swollen belly, feeling their child kick and move, and think about how lucky she was. "What should we name the baby?" James asked one evening. They had been discussing it for months without settling on anything. Finally, Elena said, "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father, Mateo. And if it is a girl, I want a name that works in both languages, something like Isabel or Elena." "Not Elena," James said. "There is only one Elena, and I married her. But Isabel is beautiful, Isabel Martinez Wheeler, or Mateo Martinez Wheeler. Either one sounds perfect to me." In late November, on a cold night with stars bright overhead, Elena went into labor. James sent Carlos racing for the midwife while he stayed with Elena, holding her hand, whispering encouragement in Spanish and English both. Rosa arrived first, taking charge with calm efficiency, and then the midwife, an older Anglo woman named Mrs. Henderson, who surprised Elena by greeting her in passable Spanish. "I have been delivering babies in New Mexico for 30 years, she said with a smile. "You pick up the language." The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next morning. James stayed with Elena the entire time, even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. He refused to leave, refused to let go of her hand. "I am not going anywhere," he told Elena. "We are in this together, remember? Everything together." At dawn, with the first light creeping through the window, Elena gave birth to a son. He came into the world crying lustily, his face red and furious, his tiny fists waving. The midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Elena's arms. "Hello, Mateo," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my beautiful boy." James was crying too, unashamed, staring at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Elena, he is absolutely perfect." Little Mateo was indeed perfect, with a shock of dark hair like Elena's, and eyes that would eventually settle into James's gray blue. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept his parents awake at all hours, but filled their house with joy. James proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Mateo when he cried at night. Singing Spanish lullabies he had learned from Elena in a soft, off-key voice that somehow always soothed the baby. Winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments. Elena recovered from the birth, and slowly their lives found a new rhythm that included their son. When spring came again, they planted their second crop, with Mateo sleeping in a basket at the edge of the field, watched over by whoever was not actively working. "This is our life now," James said one evening, looking around at the land they had built together, the home they had made, the family they had created. "This is what we fought for, and it was worth every moment." "Yes," Elena agreed, watching Mateo sleep peacefully in his cradle, his tiny chest rising and falling. "It was worth everything." As Mateo grew from infant to toddler, Elena and James made good on their promise to raise him bilingual. They spoke Spanish and English interchangeably in the house, teaching Mateo words in both languages simultaneously. His first word was mama, his second was papa, and his third was caballo when James took him to see the horses. The little community they had built continued to thrive. The Wheeler Ranch, as people had begun calling it, became known as a place where everyone was welcome, where Spanish and English were both spoken, where different cultures met and mixed and created something new. They hired more workers as the ranch grew, building houses for the families who came to work the land permanently. Miguel and Rosa became like family, their children playing with Mateo, sharing meals and celebrations. They held a proper baptism for Mateo at the old mission ruins, which had been partially restored and reconsecrated. It seemed fitting to Elena that her son should be blessed in the same place where she had first met James, where she had first dared to hope for a different future. When Mateo was 2 years old, Elena discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she had Rosa and other women from the community supporting her. James was just as attentive, but slightly less panicked, having been through it once before. Their daughter Isabel was born on a warm spring evening, arriving much faster than her brother had. She was smaller and quieter than Mateo had been as a baby, with James's lighter coloring and Elena's delicate features. Mateo, now old enough to be curious, peered at his little sister with fascination and immediately tried to share his favorite toy horse with her. "He is going to be a good big brother," James said, watching Mateo gently pat Isabel's tiny hand. "He learned from the best father," Elena said softly. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered, year by year. They expanded the cattle herd, improved the irrigation system, built a new barn, and additional housing for workers. James became known in the territory as a fair employer and a skilled rancher, while Elena's reputation as a healer and cook spread throughout the region. She had learned her grandmother's recipes and remedies, and people came from miles around for her advice on everything from colic to growing chilies in the harsh New Mexico soil. But it was not just the practical success that made their life rich. It was the love that infused everything they did. James never stopped learning Spanish, never stopped asking Elena to teach him new words, new phrases, new ways of expressing himself in her language. And Elena never stopped being grateful for the gift he had given her, the gift of being seen, of being valued, of being able to speak her truth without fear. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they were silent, but always they were connected, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. "Do you remember the first day we met?" James asked one such evening when they had been married for 5 years. "When I heard you in the ruins, speaking Spanish like it was a prayer?" "I remember," Elena said. "I thought you were going to be like everyone else, telling me my language was wrong, that I was wrong. And instead I asked you to teach me," James said. "Best decision I ever made. Well, second best. The best decision was asking you to marry me." Elena smiled. "I am glad you were a terrible student at first. It meant I had to spend more time with you." "I was not that terrible," James protested, but he was grinning. "You were awful," Elena teased. "You sounded like you were choking on rocks, but you kept trying, and that was what mattered. You cared enough to keep trying." "I would have learned any language for you," James said seriously. "I would have done anything for you. I still would." "I know," Elena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And I would do anything for you. We built this life together, James. Every good thing in it, we made together." Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and harvests and the milestones of their children's lives. Mateo grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and could speak Spanish and English with equal fluency. Isabel was quieter, but equally smart, with a gift for drawing and an uncanny ability to remember every story she was ever told. Both children grew up hearing about their grandfather Martinez and their grandmother Maria, about the history of the land they lived on, about the struggles and triumphs that had made their lives possible. When Elena turned 30, James threw her a surprise party, inviting everyone from their community. The house and yard filled with people, with music, with the smell of food cooking and the sound of laughter in 2 languages. Miguel played guitar, while Carlos sang old Mexican ballads. The children ran wild, playing games that mixed traditions from both cultures. Elena stood in the middle of it all, holding James's hand, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what her mother had wanted for her, a life of love and freedom and joy. This was what she and James had built together, word by word, day by day, from the moment he had asked her to teach him her language and had really meant teach him her heart. "Thank you," she told James that night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for learning my language when the world wanted to silence it. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am." "Thank you for teaching me," James replied. "Not just Spanish, but how to love, how to build something real, how to be part of something bigger than myself. You gave me a home, Elena. You gave me a purpose. You gave me everything." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of 2 people who had chosen each other every single day since the moment they met. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Elena whispered to James in Spanish, telling him all the things she loved about him, all the dreams she still had for their future, all the ways he had changed her life. And James understood every word because he had spent years learning her language, learning her heart, learning to love her in the way she deserved to be loved, completely, unreservedly, and without conditions. As the children grew older, Elena and James told them the story of how they met, how their father had learned Spanish to honor their mother, how love could bridge any divide if both people were willing to do the work. They told them about Robert Thornton, too, because it was important that Mateo and Isabel understand the history, understand what their mother had overcome. "But we do not hate him," Elena explained to her children when Mateo was 10 and Isabel was 8. "Hate is a poison that hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else. We acknowledge what he did was wrong, and we make sure it never happens again. That is how we honor those who suffered, including my mother, your grandmother." "Will anyone ever punish us for speaking Spanish?" Isabel asked, her dark eyes worried. "Not while we are here to protect you," James said fiercely. "And we are teaching you to be strong, to know your worth, so that even when we are gone, you will never let anyone make you feel less than you are." "You are part of 2 heritages," Elena added. "Anglo and Mexican, English and Spanish. Both are valuable. Both make you who you are. Never let anyone tell you that you have to choose one or reject the other. The children absorbed these lessons, growing up confident in their dual identity, comfortable moving between languages and cultures. Mateo eventually became fascinated with ranching, learning everything he could from his father and Miguel. Isabel developed a love of books and teaching, often helping younger children in the community learn to read in both English and Spanish. When Elena was 35 and James was 39, they had one more child, a surprise since they thought their family was complete. Another son, whom they named Samuel after James's father. Samuel was the spitting image of James as a baby, according to the one faded photograph James had saved from his childhood. He was a happy, laughing child who charmed everyone he met. "Our family is complete now," Elena said, holding baby Samuel while watching Mateo and Isabel play in the yard. "3 beautiful children, a home we built with our own hands, land that flourishes, and love that grows stronger every year. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," James agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders. "This is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever thought I would have. You gave me this, Elena. You and your courage and your willingness to trust a dusty cowboy who stumbled into your refuge." "We gave this to each other," Elena corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you." The years kept turning, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard times, droughts that tested their irrigation system, a flu that swept through the community one winter, the death of Miguel from a fall from his horse when he was 53. There were losses and setbacks and moments when it seemed like everything they had built might crumble. But they endured because they had each other, and they had the community they had built, and they had the strength that came from honoring their truth. And the hard times made the good times sweeter, successful harvests, weddings, and baptisms, the birth of grandchildren, as Mateo grew up and married a girl from a neighboring ranch, giving Elena and James their first grandchild when Elena was 41. She held that baby, a little girl named Maria, after her grandmother, and felt the circle completing itself. From her mother, Maria, to her daughter, Isabel, to her granddaughter, Maria, the chain of love and heritage continued, unbroken. James was aging gracefully, his sandy hair going silver at the temples, his face weathering into distinguished lines. He was still strong, still active, still working the ranch alongside their sons and the hired hands, and he was still learning Spanish, still asking Elena for new words, still practicing until he got the pronunciation perfect. "Will you ever stop being a student?" Elena teased him one day when he asked her how to say a complicated phrase he had heard at the market. "Not as long as you are here to teach me," James replied. "Besides, I like being your student. It means I get to keep falling in love with you every day, one word at a time." When Elena was 50 and James was 54, they celebrated their silver anniversary, 25 years of marriage. Their children threw them a party even bigger than the one James had thrown for Elena's 30th birthday. It seemed like half the territory showed up, a testament to the life they had built and the community they had fostered. At the party, James stood up to make a speech. He spoke in Spanish, his accent still not quite perfect after all these years, but close enough, fluent enough, heartfelt enough. 25 years ago, he said, "I was a drifter with nothing to my name but a horse and a few dollars. I thought I was looking for work, but what I found was something much more valuable. I found Elena, and she gave me everything, a home, a family, a purpose, and a language of the heart. She taught me that love is not just about saying the words, but about doing the work, about learning who someone really is and honoring that truth every single day. I have tried to honor her truth, her language, her heritage, for a quarter century now, and I will keep trying for the rest of my life. Te amo, mi amor. Hoy y siempre. I love you, my love, today and always." There was not a dry eye in the house. Elena stood and kissed her husband, then responded in English, so everyone would understand. "James Wheeler gave me back my voice," she said. "At a time when I thought I would be silenced forever, he asked me to teach him my language. He saw value in what others wanted to erase. He loved me not despite who I was, but because of it. And that kind of love, the kind that says, 'Show me who you are, and I will learn to speak your language,' that is the rarest and most precious kind. I am blessed beyond measure to have spent these 25 years with him, and I look forward to many more. The celebration lasted until dawn, with music and dancing and food and joy. Their children danced with their partners, their grandchildren, 3 now, with more on the way, ran wild in the yard, and Elena and James danced together under the stars, moving to the rhythm of a Mexican waltz, their bodies still fitting together perfectly after all these years. As they danced, Elena thought about that girl she had been at 19, crying in the ruins, convinced her life was over before it had really begun. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that love was coming, that freedom was possible, that her language and her heritage would not only survive, but thrive. But she could not go back. She could only go forward, and forward meant waking up every morning next to the man who had learned her language to win her heart, who had never stopped learning, who had made good on every promise he had ever made. The ranch continued to prosper as Elena and James grew older. They handed over more of the daily operations to Mateo and Samuel, who worked the land with the same love and respect their parents had taught them. Isabel became a teacher in town, opening a school that taught in both English and Spanish, ensuring that other children would grow up bilingual and proud of their dual heritage. Elena's health remained good well into her 60s, though she slowed down, spending more time in her garden and less time working the fields. James's body bore the scars of a lifetime of ranch work, a bad knee that ached in cold weather, shoulders that had been worked hard for decades. But he was still active, still engaged, still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. They became the elder statesmen of their community, the couple everyone looked to for advice and wisdom. Young people who were courting would come to ask them the secret of a happy marriage, and they always gave the same answer, sometimes in English, sometimes in Spanish, but always the same truth. Love is a choice you make every day, Elena would say. It is not just a feeling. It is deciding to honor the other person, to learn who they really are, to make space for them to be themselves. And it is work, James would add. Good work, joyful work, but work nonetheless. You have to keep learning, keep growing, keep choosing each other even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. On their 50th wedding anniversary, when Elena was 69 and James was 73, they held a quiet celebration with just their immediate family. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren gathered in the house that Elena and James had made into a home. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Elena and James sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The land stretched out before them, green and growing, fed by the irrigation system they had improved over decades, worked by families who had built their own lives on the foundation Elena and James had laid. "We did it," Elena said softly. "We built something that will last." "We did," James agreed. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "And it all started because I heard you speaking Spanish in those ruins and decided it was a language worth learning." "It was the way you asked," Elena said. "You did not demand, you did not judge. You just asked if I would teach you, like my language was a gift rather than a shame." "It was a gift," James said. "It still is. Every day I get to hear you speak Spanish is a gift. Every day I get to speak it with you is a gift. Every day I get to love you is a gift." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The same stars that had shone on them the night they met, the night they married, every significant night of their lives together. "What word are you thinking of?" James asked eventually. Elena had a habit of thinking in Spanish, and James had learned to recognize the distant look that meant she was searching for the right word to express what she felt. "Siempre," Elena said. "Always, forever. It means both, you know. Siempre is not just a duration of time. It is a promise. It is a commitment to something that transcends time." "Siempre," James repeated. "I love you siempre. That feels right." "Yes," Elena agreed. "You love me sempre, and I love you semper, and this life we built will continue semper through our children and their children and all the lives we have touched." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, until Elena's joints were stiff and James had to help her stand. They walked slowly into the house, into the bedroom that had been theirs for 5 decades, and they lay down together under quilts Elena had made years ago, their bodies fitting together like 2 pieces of a puzzle. "Buenas noches, mi amor," James whispered. "Buenas noches," Elena replied. They fell asleep holding hands, the way they had every night since they were married, and they dreamed of sunlight and horses and the sound of children speaking two languages, dreams woven from memory and hope and love. Years passed, and Elena and James grew older still. James's health began to decline first. His heart, the doctor said, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and hard living before he met Elena. He took medicine, slowed down even more, let his sons handle everything on the ranch. But he never complained, never raged against the limitations of his aging body. "I have had a good life," he told Elena when she fretted over him. "A better life than I ever deserved, and it is not over yet. We still have time." And they did have time, though not as much as Elena would have wished. James died peacefully in his sleep 2 months after his 76th birthday, his hand in Elena's, his last words a whispered "te amo" that Elena would carry in her heart for the rest of her days. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But Elena was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, holding her up when she could not stand on her own, speaking to her in Spanish and English both, reminding her that James's love had not died with him. It lived on in every person he had touched, every life he had changed, every word of Spanish he had learned and taught to others. They buried him in a small cemetery on the ranch property near where the old mission ruins still stood. Elena had the headstone inscribed in 2 languages because that was who James had been, a bridge between worlds, a man who had learned to speak the language of love in more than one tongue. James Wheeler, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he learned her language and spoke it with love. Aprendió su idioma y lo habló con amor, 1855 to 1931. Elena lived for 3 more years after James died, years she filled with her family, her garden, and her memories. She wrote down their story in a leather-bound journal, writing in both English and Spanish, wanting future generations to know how their family had begun, what their grandfather had sacrificed and built, what their grandmother had endured and overcome. On a warm spring day in 1934, Elena Martinez Wheeler passed away quietly in her sleep, in the house she and James had made into a home, surrounded by photographs of her family, and the sound of her great-grandchildren playing in the yard outside, speaking Spanish and English interchangeably, the way she and James had always dreamed. They buried her next to James, and her children added their own inscription to her headstone. Elena Martinez. Wheeler, beloved, wife, mother, grandmother. She taught him her language, and he learned to love. Le enseñó su idioma y él aprendió a amar. 1859 to 1934. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, and the story of Elena and James became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of the cowboy who learned Spanish to win the heart of a woman who had been punished for speaking her own language in her own home. The story of 2 people who built a life on the foundation of respect and understanding and the willingness to learn each other's words, each other's worlds, each other's hearts. And in that corner of New Mexico, on land that had been Mexico before it was America, where Spanish and English both had deep roots, people still told the story as an example of what love could be, what it should be. Not the erasure of difference, but the celebration of it. Not the demand for conformity, but the embrace of authenticity. Not the silencing of one voice to make room for another, but the learning of new languages so all voices could be heard. The old mission ruins, partially restored, became a place where couples came to exchange their vows, where they promised to learn each other's languages, literal and metaphorical, for the rest of their lives. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people said you could hear the echo of 2 voices in those ruins, one teaching and one learning, forever speaking words of love in 2 languages, siempre, always, together.